So you're thinking about making a move to the Portland, Oregon area, and in this video, we're going to talk about the differences in living in Portland versus living in Vancouver, Washington, and why people choose one area over the other. We're going to share with you a lot of insights on why you might choose living in Portland versus Vancouver and vice versa, and we're getting after it right now.
If this is your first time to the channel and you want to know everything there is to know about living in Portland, Oregon, then click the subscribe button below and tap that notification bell so you can be the first to know about the current market in Portland, Oregon.
My name's Ann Stewart, this is Erica Hagfirst, and we get calls, emails, and text messages every day from people looking to make a move to the Portland, Oregon area, and we absolutely love it. So whether you're moving in 9 days or 90 days, give us a call, shoot us a text, or send us an email. All of our information is in the description below so we can help you make a smooth move to Portland, Oregon. So you're making the move to the Portland area and you're also considering checking out what the Vancouver, Washington area has to offer because it feels like it's so close to Portland, so why the heck not?
And really, if you look at the map, it could truly be a suburb of Portland. It's only about 15 minutes north of the heart of downtown Portland. And for a lot of people, it is a very viable option.
Mm-hmm. And we have the Columbia River, which is the main waterway between Oregon and Washington. And there's only two ways that you're going to get up to the Vancouver area or down to Portland, which is the I-5 bridge and the 205 bridge. Now the I-5 bridge, most of the time when you're on the west side of town, you take the I-5 to Vancouver because it's the closest bridge there.
Yep.
And you also have 205, which most people on the east side take to go up to Vancouver. But you have to take one of those bridges to get up there unless you want to swim across.
And just so you know, when we're talking about Vancouver, we're talking about all of the surrounding communities like Camas and Ridgefield and Battleground, Brush Prairie. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is most of Clark County, which extends pretty far north and south, and then east and west. So no, it's a pretty large area, just like the Portland Metro.
Yep. So we're just going to dive into some of the obvious reasons why people would choose living across the river in Vancouver, Clark County area, and that is the financial benefits.
It's a huge one. So the biggest is in Washington, you don't pay a state income tax, which for a lot of people seems like a really great option. In Oregon, it can be anywhere from 4.75 to 9%. So that's a significant chunk of change for some people. And it really does become a factor for people who are thinking of both Portland and Vancouver as options. The one thing to consider is that we don't pay sales tax though down here.
Yeah.
Whereas you do pay sales tax, which varies, if I remember correctly, from county to county in Washington. So, and it can be expensive. I know in some of the northern counties, you're upwards of 11%, and that's on every transaction.
Now, it's not to say people don't come down across the river to buy a lot of goods. In fact, there's a big Costco right across the river that I know a lot of people in Vancouver area come down to. And I do personally have family that moved from the Portland area up to Vancouver just to take advantage of some of that tax break. Because if you're paying close to 9% in income taxes, it's not a joke. It's definitely something to consider. We're also going to be pointing out that it may be something to consider financially if you want to live in Washington and make the commute down to Oregon, because if you work in Oregon, which a lot of people from Vancouver do, you're still going to pay state income tax unless your employer's headquarters is located in the state of Washington. So that's really something to investigate based on your job. Because a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to get the added benefit of living in Washington, not having to pay that state income tax. Oh, well, if you work down here in Oregon, that's not the case. So just make sure you understand your personal employer situation. Now, if you're self-employed or you have the benefit of working from home, then maybe it is worth considering that tax advantage. I mean, it's a big tax incentive, but like Erica was saying, we don't pay sales tax down here in Portland. So that's a big advantage for us who live down here. And we'll go into a little bit too why a lot of people, you kind of live where you live. So we'll get into that in a little bit here, because that's something to keep into place. Like if you truly plan on coming down to Portland a lot to buy your goods, then that you can save some money. But if you're not one of those people, or you buy way out in Vancouver, because Vancouver, like just say Clark County, it's really spread out. You're doing a lot of driving, so we'll go into that.
And there's gonna be some things to consider around the driving aspect. So yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later.
So we want to give you guys some real perspective on what it's like to live in Portland versus Vancouver in terms of what your lifestyle might choose to be. So just in full disclosure, both Erica and I live in the greater Portland metro area.
I have previously lived up in a suburb of northern Vancouver and, had to make that commute down to Oregon for work. And Anne, you have family.
I have family that live up there. I've had family that lived up there and moved down. So we have a pretty good idea of what it's like to not only live in those areas, but know people that live in those areas.
And commute in those areas.
And commuting. And so even though Vancouver, like we shared, is not that far away, on a map and with no traffic involved, it's a really easy jump across the river. But that is actually not how it plays out in real life. And so we want to give you that perspective because most of the people that call us and say, hey, we can live in either Vancouver or Portland, or they want to live in Portland, but they want the prices in Vancouver. There's a lot of things to consider in that because where you live is typically where you stay.
Yeah.
And the number one thing is that people in Portland who live in Portland, they really don't go up to Vancouver for any reason.
Here's a really interesting thing to think about. So when I was living up in Vancouver, coming down to Portland, it could take 45 minutes to cross the bridge. It should have taken about 10.
Right.
And, you have a couple of things with that. You have just basic traffic of people coming down from Vancouver into Portland. Then on top of that, you add in the traffic of bridgeless, and it's a serious thing. They can take a lot of time sometimes. And then accidents. I mean, it just, unfortunately, we only have 3 lanes crossing the river. And so I think we're usually at about 4 or 5 lanes on the highway right before we get to border crossing. And so, you get a huge bottleneck as you try to cross either direction. But what would always be frustrating for me as I was coming from Vancouver down to Portland is that the other side, Portland going north, it was like a ghost town. There was nobody there, and it was just wide open.
Yeah, it's easier to get up
and so that just went to show me that Portland people are staying in Portland. Yeah. And one of the things that I notice when we have people who are looking to buy in Portland is that they all want the walkability. They want to be able to walk to their local coffee shop. They want to be able to walk to a bakery. And that's not something that you really get in Vancouver. It's a pretty spread out area. And so you're generally...
It's a bedroom community.
Yeah.
It's a more bedroom community. Like you have to have a car because you don't have a lot of, walkability or public transportation that can easily get you to and from. And even with like my family that lives up across the river, they come down to Portland all the time for getting their car serviced or, their hair done or, other amenities or different reasons they come down all the time. But for Portland people, we just don't go up to Vancouver for really any reason. Unless we're visiting family and friends, which even then, like my family complains I don't go up there enough to see them and they come down here, but that's another story.
Yeah, it's super true. And that then creates making the decision of what's your lifestyle like. Do you need that? Do you need the walkability, or are you happier being in a getting more maybe house for your dollar and being able to hop in the car and that's okay with you?
Yeah. So. Now another thing to consider that is coming, and again it was supposed to happen in the next year. We don't know if that's still going to happen, but is toll roads. So what's been on the docket for Oregon Department of Transportation is they want toll roads to come into play. We don't have the exact timing yet. If you go onto ODOT's website, you can kind of see their grand plan, but it's going to affect the I-5, 205 freeways, which again is going to affect possibly traffic and the cost of having to make that trip across the river. Now, if you don't have any need to come down to Portland all that often, it may not affect you. The reality is if you go up to Vancouver and you like what you see and you can see yourself living there, then it may not have any bearing on your decision to whether toll roads come into play or not, because you're going to live and be in the Vancouver area. But if you're thinking about, hey, I want to live in Vancouver, but I want to commute down to Oregon or do most of my activities or my amenities down in the Oregon area, that's going to affect you. And we've had a lot of clients who chose that as an option, and later it just got to be such a grind on them that they later had to make the move back to Oregon just for the sanity, just for the quality of life.
The hard part is that there's no predictability in terms of the traffic, which I think most people know, but even with crossing the rivers, it just adds a whole nother layer to that commuting aspect. And really making sure that, when I was living up in Vancouver, I knew I had to be heading north relatively quickly, no later than like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because otherwise I was going to be sitting in traffic and I might as well not leave until like 7 o'clock when it started to clear out. So those are, timing of your life becomes a really big component just to making sure that you're not sitting in traffic for hours on end. But to speak to the toll roads, it will be, something that they've been pushing for a very long time. So seeing that as reality here in the near future, I would just assume that it's going to happen.
And always they're working on the roads.
Yeah.
And there's another big project they're working on I-5, which probably is going to be 10 years in the making. But the toll roads are the ones we are focused on because those are seemingly coming sooner. But we can't express it enough about the whole commute traffic. So you can look in both areas. Just know that if you're intending to play or work in one side of the river or the other, usually it's people living in Vancouver and coming down to Portland, it's going to be something that plays into your life. So.
And the one thing too is weekends don't make this any better. Weekends are almost worse because it's like an all-day thing.
Good point.
You don't know when the busy times are going to be, or and then you add on to that if there's events going on in Portland that you have to be aware of. It just makes traffic 10 times worse. So we would love to say that it's easy peasy and you can just breeze across whenever you want, but it's just not the truth.
And just for some perspective too, because I do have family that lives up in the Vancouver area, right across the river, and then also further out in like the Washougal. From my house, which is in Southwest Portland, it takes me a solid hour, like no less. And if it's got any kind of traffic issues, like an accident or whatever, it can take, go ahead and add some time onto that. So it's an hour just to get up there, even though it's not that far. So you can see how quickly, it can deteriorate your quality of life if you're not prepared for it. So just something to be mindful of as you consider living on either side of the river for whatever reason.
Yeah,
so.
It's where, even work, like if you're working in Vancouver, then maybe that makes more sense to stay up there. Or if you're working in Portland, especially if you're having to work further south in the Portland metro area, definitely something to consider. The 405, which kind of circles the city, gets to be very busy as well.
Yeah.
So all things to take into account.
Yeah, definitely if you're going to be working on the west side of town, it's going to be traffic nightmare for you. So yeah. And if you have any questions on this, always reach out to us. We can walk you through like what does that kind of look like commute-wise if you have questions on specific areas.
And don't map things at midnight because it's going to look great. It's going to look absolutely fantastic. You're going to be like 15. Map it at like 8 a.m., 7 a.m., 5 p.m. That's really when you want to get a true idea of how long it's going to take you to go somewhere on our highways.
Great point. So let's talk a little bit more about lifestyle and amenities, because one of the things that you really need to consider if you're choosing to live in the Vancouver area over Portland is how do you like to live? Like, I'll give you an example for me. Like, I like to have all of my amenities, like my gym, where I get my nails done, where I see my doctors, where I go shopping, all the things. I have to have that within 5 to 10 minutes of my house because that's just how I live. I live and do all my stuff within a certain proximity. And most areas of Portland have that ability, depending on where you're at, and even you living a little bit considerably further out, not really.
I'm live in a slightly more rural setting, but I still have all my amenities relatively close to me. Some within 5 minutes and some within, maybe 15. But it's a very easy commute, both to get to the highways, which is something to consider as well. I'm very accessible to almost all things. If that's important to you, I would say the number one thing that I hear from a lot of the people that we help with buying in Portland is walkability. They don't want to necessarily have to have a car. Some people don't even, or if it's a couple, there's only one car that they share. And that's because they don't need a vehicle to go to the grocery store, go to a restaurant, get coffee, any of those things. They're just close. Whereas that's not necessarily the case if you go up to Vancouver and some of these outlying communities. You're getting in your car to go everywhere. Yeah. And even sometimes, to exercise if you want to go out and go for a run or whatnot, maybe you don't have a super dense or safe area in some of those communities. So something to think about is what is that area offering? How far away are your grocery stores and your gym and your, a hospital? Sounds funny to think about sometimes, but it is very important, especially depending on age and health, all those things. Then, the other thing that is probably a factor in both Vancouver and Portland would be that they have a homeless problem. And unfortunately, both communities are working on it. They're trying to address it. It isn't necessarily getting better, and it has been getting worse in the last couple of years, especially with COVID. But both governments are trying
both
to
areas struggle with that.
Yeah, take care of it, and it's a kind of part of life.
Now let's talk about home prices, because that's what a lot of people want to know is what do you get living in Vancouver area, Clark County versus Portland, and we can tell you right up front that you're going to get more square footage.
Yeah, a lot more
in the house.
Yep.
And the lot. In fact, the Columbian, which is the newspaper in the Clark County area, just came out with an article that said you're going to get about 660 more square feet buying in the Clark County area than you would in Portland.
And, you know, to add to that, if you're somebody who wants a big lot, you're going to get about 2,500 square feet more in lot size, which is, that's pretty big. I mean, Portland, really, we're all about kind of maximizing and creating some density in the cities. And so if you're not wanting to be as dense, then it could be a really great option for you because you're getting a lot more square footage wise on those lots and space in the house.
Yeah, and there's a lot more expansion happening in the Clark County area. You know, there's a ton of new construction happening in Ridgefield.
All of these smaller communities along kind of the I-5 corridor are on the expansion. So Ridgefield, Brush Prairie, Battleground, these are, you know, once were very small towns, and now they're growing because they have land. They were farm communities, and now they're growing. And so there's a lot more room to expand, whereas in Portland, we have limited space. We have an urban growth boundary, which kind of limits how much land can be used for development. And that kind of drives our prices up, as well as, you know, limits how much we can do.
Yeah, and if you're looking in Portland, you're going to notice like we're what we call landlocked. There's not these big expansive areas that they can put a huge planned subdivision in, which is part of what Erica mentioned is our prices stay nice and healthy and continue to go up, especially on the east side of town and all these cute little bungalow communities that everybody just loves. And so it just creates our pricing to be healthy, but it also is hard because affordability gets harder and you don't get as much house. So it's really about, again, going back to the lifestyle question, what do you want to live in? What type of house do you need for your needs? For some people, they're like, I'll pay more to live in a cute bungalow style house where I can be within walking distance to coffee shops and restaurants, and I'm close to downtown, and I'm living the Portland scene. That is something you have to decide, like, what do you want out of a house in your lifestyle? And that's going back to the number one question that we always ask people coming into Portland area who are considering both options. What do you see your life living like? Because for some people, they don't need to have the walkability factor. They don't need to have a certain type of house. It's, I need this many bedrooms, this many bathrooms, we work from home. Well, guess what? You have both sides of the river to choose from, and you might choose having a bigger lot, a bigger house up and over the river.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it makes sense. It really, this is where what your lifestyle looks like, it matters the most in terms of choosing where you want to be, because it's not necessarily just about the numbers, it's about what kind of life you want to lead. Yeah. That's really a question that you guys just have to answer, but we're happy to help you with the conversation.
Now, if you're looking at prices, just to give you an idea, over the river, because it's not like they're extremely less affordable. So that's something to point out too, is their inventory actually over the last 3 years rivaled Portland's, meaning they had less inventory to buy than Portland, which drove up their prices. Yep. And you might have heard of a place called Camas, which is just east of Vancouver. They got great school systems, and their average price point's right around $800,000 and rising. They have new construction. They have homes that have views of the river.
And the lake. They have Lacamas Lake, which is amazing.
That's right. And then Washougal's also expanding. They've got a lot of newer schools popping up everywhere. The schools are great. If you get online, you can see the ratings for that. And then, of course, up towards like Brush Prairie and Battleground and Ridgefield and all that. So there is a lot happening up there in terms of construction. So you get a lot more bang for your buck. But again, it comes down to lifestyle.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's all about the lifestyle.
It's all about lifestyle. As you're making decisions to move to Portland area or Vancouver, feel free to give us a call. All of our information is below, so you can reach out to us, and we'll see you on the next video.